Since I'm not 100% sure how much more multi-sampling we're actually going to be doing, I thought it would be a good idea to just look at the fade modes because they might come in handy for you if you are doing a lot of multi-sampling. So what we're going to do here is we're going to grab a couple samples. Let's start with this background noise sample. I'm going to go ahead, bring that in. I'll put that onto C3 and let's just extend the range so it goes C2 up to C4. And by default here, it is key tracking this. Let's turn off the velocity sensitivity for now. And just for the sake of it, let's go ahead and turn that off. So no matter what key I hit, we're hearing it play back at its regular tempo, regular speed, regular pitch. Now I'm gonna bring in this little vocal thing here. We're actually gonna have it highlight over the exact same key range. Again, I'll turn off key tracking, and then I'm gonna have it go and cover that same range. Now, if you needed to do any editing on that first sample, we could go up here and we can click and you can see how we can change the display like so. But once you get your stuff in and you get the root key set and all of that, a lot of times what you're gonna do is you're gonna go to this other mode where you can see your samples going down like so. Now, the first thing we can do is Keefe Aiding, meaning that if I play C2 and I want this to be the one fading in, okay, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna do this and you can see how now it's fading up. So now when I play up that first octave, we can barely hear that. It's getting louder. Until we bring it all the way in. Likewise, something we could do is if we want to change the range of this guy, we could put it here, and as this one's fading in, this one is fading out based on the keys that we're pressing. So let's go up one octave. So there's one, so in this instance, there's never a time where they're both all in at full blast, okay? But obviously you can set that accordingly. So let's go ahead and turn those fades off for now and bring it right back. The next fade option we have involves velocity. And over here, we see our velocities like so. So let's go ahead and we're gonna do something like this, where if I'm hitting the key very softly, okay, we should expect to hear the super booth ambience at full tilt, but we should be hearing the little vocal thing a little bit quieter. So I'm gonna just barely tap a key. I'm gonna barely tap the key. There we go. And now this time I'll hit it a little harder. This time I'll really slam it. And again, we could have it going the opposite way as well for the other sound. So we'll take the velocity and we'll add our fade here. And now let's do the same thing, but just in reverse. So I'm gonna slam the key. And it is possible if I hit anything kind of in this range here from 64 to 80 that we are going to be hearing both samples at full blast. Okay, so that's how you would work it with velocity and not using the keys. And again, this is one of the videos where it is up to you to start thinking about ways you could use this. Okay, when would you want to do it key tracking? When would you want to do it using velocity? With velocity, especially if things are key tracking exactly the same, this would be useful for you to set different ranges, or like, you know, you could even set this velocity range here, and then we could do some stuff with the fades like this, so that there's only a certain range where you're hearing it, and then at other times you're hearing just the one guy. So yeah, there's definitely a lot that you can do with the velocity one, especially if like you're sampling a bunch of pads or bass sounds or whatever. It can add a little intrigue that every once in a while you start to hear a different sound in the background. So that's definitely a very usable one. The last one is unique to this sampler, at least on the top level, having the selection tool. So let's go ahead and let's clear all this stuff back out so you guys, so we don't get confused. And so this would be a little bit more like if you were layering drum sounds, I would imagine. This is when I would probably use the selects, that we could get different levels there, especially if we were having this thing jump around. So let's just go ahead and show it to you. So under select here, we can change our view. It's gonna look very similar to what we just did with velocity, only now with select. Let's go ahead and let's add a fade in on this guy. So right now with the select all the way at 0, we're mostly just gonna hear the ambience. Now, if I turn this in real time, nothing is gonna change. you have to wait for me to trigger another key. And that's why for drums, I think this is a little bit more usable. So if I bring this up now, once we get up over that, whatever that range was that we set in the 80s somewhere, we're now hearing them both at full tilt. We could take this one with our select and we could add the fade the other way. And of course, you can mix and match these in all sorts of unique and creative ways. But if you're triggering something a bunch of times and then maybe you have an LFO or some other kind of modulator on here bouncing around, you'd be surprised at all the different sort of sounds that you're able to generate. And you can imagine you have a bunch of other things in here as well. The other thing that I thought I would go into now is just round robin, because that's just another type of playback. So let's go ahead and let's actually just clear these out just because it will be easier for me to explain this to you. And let's see what this sounds like. Okay, let's hear what this sounds like. Okay, we'll take these first three and we're gonna bring them in, and let's go ahead and put them onto C3. It's trying to give me a range that I don't want. This is where it gets confusing for me. Now I do have to go back to the other mode, so I know I can pull down and just put them all into one key. We'll go C2. Okay, and again, if I play a C2, we're gonna hear everything. One thing that might be cool, especially if we had a bunch of sound effects or we had some variation on like hi-hats or whatever, would be to have these guys play back in round robin. So let's select them all from here just because that's a little bit easier for us to see. And now with zone logic, what we're going to do is round robin. So now it's going to play these in order. So the first time I hit, and we can probably go and see it this way. The first time I was hitting, I got that first one, then I got the second one. Now I get the third one. And the most common usage of this is if somebody was making a really detailed multi-sample. Let's say that I was resampling a particular drum kit and a really good drummer, and I would tell them, I'd say, try to play this hi-hat exactly the same, 100 times or whatever. And I sit there with my microphone. I get all 100 of them. I love all of them. Okay, there's tiny, tiny little differences. And that's something that, maybe a listener is expecting, or if you want to add realism, you would stack all 100 of them there. And then anytime that note triggered and it was a hi-hat, you'd be getting all those different hi-hats there just to add a bit of variation. Okay, very subtle thing, but it is something that's done commonly. So let's just set that up with some hi-hats just because that's probably the better example. Let's go and let's search for closed hat. Okay, let me just make sure these are all relatively short. All right, cool. I'm gonna go back into this mode again. I'll grab just these guys here. I'll put them onto C2. Okay, and then again, right now we're gonna hear a crazy layering. But if I go in here and I change this to round robin, and we change our zone, we can see it playing through them like so. And again, what we could do is on the select knob, we have an option here where maybe instead of it doing it this way and we want a little bit more randomization, what we actually could do would be to go in and instead of having it do this in round robin, let's turn that off. We could instead do something like this where we route them all. If I right click, distribute select equally. Okay, so we do that. It's now changing those select values. So now we're hearing different ones here like so. And then again, we could very easily just set a modulator here, a random, an LFO, whatever, a step sequencer, something that's gonna bounce around so that we're getting some different sounds with different notes that are being triggered. Okay, so like always in Bitwig, there's a lot of flexibility. There's always more than one way to accomplish something, but those are some of the other settings, fade and round robin, that we may not touch on again in this course, but they are things that are good to know about and can be used very effectively.